We're joined by Michelle Rowland, the Labor member for Greenway in Sydney's West, and Angus Taylor, the Liberal member for Hume in New South Wales. Michelle Rowland, to you first. Time appears to be running out for Andrew Chan and Myuran Sukumaran. Is there anything that anything more the government could have done here?
I believe the government and the opposition and every member of parliament has been united in our opposition to the death penalty for these two young men. They are models of rehabilitation. I believe there is a strong community sentiment that these executions should not go ahead. I actually have in my electorate the Sukumaran family's church, and we had a service there a couple of weeks ago which was overflowing, and there is a very strong sense that this will be a bad result for the world, quite frankly, if these two gentlemen are put to death, and put to death in such a violent way, particularly considering the work that they have been doing and the loss that they will be to their community, which is the inmates at the moment.
Angus Taylor, what does it say about the relationship between Australia and Indonesia that, for all the efforts of the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, all the politicians in Australia, essentially the whole community, that it appears that nothing has been able to sway the Indonesian president?
Well, can I say up front, Chris, that I think it's very, very distressing for the families of Andrew and Myuran, and we are in complete agreement across the Parliament that we would like the Indonesian authorities and the President to show mercy to two men who have been remarkable in the way they have transformed their own lives in the time they've been in prison. But friends have disagreements, and we have a disagreement on this issue. It's very clear with the Indonesian government and with the President. We would like them to show mercy, and we will be making representations and will continue to make representations on the behalf of these two men and their families.
Okay, let's move on now to domestic issues and budgetary issues. Angus Taylor, the Prime Minister, has said the GP co-payment is dead, buried and cremated. Do you believe there still needs to be some sort of price signal in the GP Medicare system to contain costs, in the decades ahead?
Look, Chris, I think you've got to take a step back here and say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And there's two problems. One is we know we need to deliver great health outcomes across Australia, and we have more and more good technology and techniques that we can use to deliver better health outcomes across Australia. But secondly, we have a health budget that's rising at close to 10% a year, with government income rising at closer to 3% a year. That's totally unsustainable, as we'll see in the intergenerational report. So we have to find, it's not about cuts, but it is about containing growth in expenditure. And we have to find ways to do that. Now, price signaling is one way to do it. There's lots of other things, innovations that are happening all around the world to do this, because we're not the only country in the world facing this problem. And the Health Minister, I know, is looking at a whole range of options to do this. But a price signal is not, it is not the only way to go about it, and we've said that's gone. That's gone. Now we're focusing on other ways to achieve what is a very, very important policy outcome.
But essentially, Medicare as we know it, with bulk billing and GP visits, is not sustainable?
There is no question that our health expenditure is unsustainable if it keeps growing at the rate it's been growing. It will swamp the economy. It's just straight maths. You will see it in the intergenerational report. So we have to do something. I don't think this is even in debate amongst informed economists. What is in debate is how we go about it. And that's why there's been this extensive consultation, which the Minister is undertaking and will continue to undertake in the coming weeks and months.
Michelle Rowland, do you accept that it's inevitable that the cost of healthcare is blowing out, ageing population, increasing price of pharmaceuticals, medical technology, etc., and the government is right to address this issue?
Chris, there's no doubt we are living longer and living better. There was a time not that long ago where if you needed a hip replacement or your hip went out, you basically went home, became immobile and slowly died. That was the reality. We have had advances in technology. But I believe there are two issues. and we talk about sustainability, Angus mentioned sustainability, I think there's two issues there. Firstly, benchmarked against the world, Medicare is clearly one of the most efficient and sustainable health systems possible, clearly. And it is clear that while we may be getting older, living longer, and there's more technologies, Medicare has been able to remain sustainable. But I think the more pertinent point to this argument...
But that's now and in the past. We're talking about the future.
Well, I'll come to that, but the more pertinent point, I think, is that the way this government has gone about addressing sustainability has been exactly the wrong end of the telescope. Any health professional will tell you, you don't make a system more sustainable by attacking primary health care. A number of years ago in a past life, I was a director of the Western Sydney Area Health Service, and I learned a bit about health economics there. And the one thing I learned, it stuck with me, and I don't know how much the figures have changed, but for every notional $1 spent in health, about 2 cents is spent on prevention. The whole point of primary healthcare and making sure we have GPs who are able to do their jobs properly, are able to diagnose chronic health, are able to manage chronic health conditions, all these aspects is what has been attacked by the Medicare co-payment. We've even seen in some parts of Western Sydney people thinking that already their GP has put in a co-payment and putting off going to the doctor. That's not a price signal, that's a bad health signal.
Okay, the Medicare co-payment is dead, but Angus Taylor, does Michelle Rowland have a point there that primary healthcare and preventative healthcare, that is money well spent, and that perhaps if we're looking at containing costs, it should be further down the medical track?
There's no question primary healthcare, which is not the same as preventative healthcare, it can be, but it's not the same, is incredibly important to the entire health system. There's no question about that, but there's nothing in the way Medicare works at the moment that actually gets to the solutions we need to. Now, I'll give you an example. So chronic health problems are the biggest problems we've got in our health system at the moment. Diabetes, cardiovascular disease and so on. And the costs of those chronic health diseases are growing astronomically. Managed care programs, which are designed to deal with this, are growing at 28% or so a year. So we have to, it's not a matter of saying, well, you shouldn't attack primary health care. It's not about attacks on primary health care. There's no question, though, primary health care has to become more effective in solving these problems. And that's why the Minister is out talking to people. I'm out talking to all of my GPs, and there's lots of ideas coming forward about how we do this, but we have to deal with it. We can't leave it the way it is. So
the government has to work out a different way, if you like, of paying for the people who occasionally go and see the doctor, and those people suffering from chronic diseases like diabetes or whatever, who are going to the doctor twice a month or something like that.
Yeah. There's no question that chronic disease needs more focus, and primary care is an important part of that. Now, there's been work done over the years to try and get that going. That's why we've got managed care plans, which are designed to solve this, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and this will be an area of focus in the coming weeks and months.
That makes sense to you, Michelle Rowland, a different way of paying for chronic disease care as opposed to occasional care?
Well, I think the issue is the same. The issue comes down to, well, are you going to penalise people for seeking treatment at the outset and even going and getting diagnosed from the outset? What I don't understand with the government's response in this is, firstly, they said they wanted a price signal, a value signal, whatever other signal it is today, and then they said they're going to start consulting with doctors now. In December, they said they had a new and improved solution. What it all comes down to, though, Chris, is that ultimately this is about the Prime Minister responding to polls. This is policy based on polls, not even this thinking about how we manage people's care and how we ensure that we ultimately keep them out of the hospital system, which is where most of the costs arise. It's simply reactionary. And 18 months in, we actually don't have a health policy from this government. And I know, Angus can say, well, what are you doing about it? Well, at least we're not even in government, and for the last 18 months we have been talking to the health experts on these issues, and it appears the government has just discovered that.
Look, honestly, Labor didn't solve any of these problems when they were in government, and I didn't want to get partisan about this, but that's the truth. The other thing I would say is, if Labor doesn't want to deal with this fast rising cost, and it's not the only one, we've also got it in aged care, we've got it in welfare, then the truth of the matter is they're going to have to raise taxes, and not once, they're going to have to keep doing it. And so, this is the choice. Politics and economics is largely about choices. That is the choice. And they've got to fess up to the Australian people about what their choice is.
Okay, well, talking of tax, Labor's put a policy on the table as a way of taxing, of stopping multinational companies of avoiding tax. The Treasurer says that if it was implemented, it would cost Australian jobs. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. This is the most extraordinary piece of policy. This is an area of policy I know well. This is using a sledgehammer to saw timber. I mean, it is flawed in its conception. It will be flawed in its execution. It will not work. A multinational that wants to get around this proposed policy from Labor will do it in about 2.5 minutes. It won't work. But Labor is right to focus on this. We're focused on this, but we think we've got a solution to this that will work, not something that's sort of concocted in academia.
So what's the answer?
Well, we've already said we've put the policy out. We need the ATO focusing on multinationals. We need them to recognise that there are many tools used by multinationals to take profit out of the country. It's not just a matter of using debt, which is the one thing that Labor's focused on. There are many tools they use, and you have to look at all of those.
You want the ATO to concentrate on, so you think there's a bureaucratic solution as opposed to a legislative solution?
Well, we know the ATO needs to have the ability and the resources to focus on this issue, because Labor's solution here is to say there is only one problem. What multinationals do is put lots of debt into their companies here in Australia and take all their profits out. Well, let me tell you, that is a small part of the problem. It's much deeper than that. And it shows their naivety, their lack of understanding about these commercial issues, that they think that's the solution to the problem.
Michelle Rowland, what's your response to that and to the Treasurer's allegation that it would cost Australian jobs?
Well, firstly, it's interesting that Angus, when asked what their solution is, goes into this fluff about, Joe Hockey's going to address the issue. I mean, he squibbed it. We were talking about this at the G20. He squibbed it in the last budget too and had some foregone income there as well. But I think it's interesting to note that the government has been saying, well, what's your solution here? This isn't the solution for everything. This is a policy that has been devised in consultation with experts and also by speaking to executives. Now, the whole point is creating a level playing field. It shouldn't be fair that a multinational company, which has some offshoot in a tax haven, should get better treatment than an Australian company which does not. And in the end, if it is going to mean that we have some sort of revenue of over $1 billion, I think nearly $2 billion, which, by the way, almost equates exactly to the amount of freezing the rebates that would otherwise accrue to GPs by 2018, I'll just note that. If we're going to have something that makes a difference in that area, then surely it's something which will be embraced. If you want to claim it's going to attack jobs, it's going to affect jobs, then please, by all means, table the Treasury advice which says this. But Labor is very up for the debate about why we need policies in this area, why we can't just talk about, we'll let the ATO do it, and we can't squib it like Joe Hockey has.
Well, that's not what we're saying.
Now, Angus Taylor, can we expect to see some policy on this announced in the budget?
So we have been talking about this for a long while. We have been working with the ATO on it. This is not new. And we recognise that this is a difficult problem that requires a broad solution, not a narrow one. And if you apply a narrow solution, it either doesn't work or it has unintended consequences like loss of jobs. I can tell you, this is an area I know well. If you apply Labor's solution, it will either not work or it will have unintended consequences. And Labor just doesn't understand this area. They think there's glib ways of ripping money out of multinationals. You've got to be smarter than that.
If it won't work, how can it cost jobs?
Well, I said either it won't work or if it does, it will have unintended consequences because it's very narrow. It's focusing on one way, one approach to how multinationals might take profit out of the country. There's many other ways that they try to do it, and they don't seem to understand.
When can we expect to hear more from the government?
Well, you've heard a fair bit already, actually, and you will hear more. I mean, this is actually an effort that will take some time, and you'll hear more about the results of that effort in coming weeks and months. But we know that a simple glib solution like Labor has proposed will not work, or if it does, it'll have bad consequences.
Okay, Angus Taylor, Michelle Rowland, thanks for your time today.
It's a pleasure,
Pleasure.
Chris.